Welcome back to the Helicon studio here at Blockchain World in Abu Dhabi. I'm Natalie Brunell, and I'm so excited to announce our next speaker, David Shing, also known as Shingy. He is a futurist, an entrepreneur, a speaker, and he specializes in emerging digital trends. So he can basically see into the future. Here's Shingy.
So, I'm often asked, is the art of storytelling, is it inherently a natural phenomenon, or can it be learnt? So here's why I want to do something different. I'm at the Bitcoin conference, and the blockchain conference, and the crypto conference. All of this, by the way, feels a bit culty to me, truth be known. But here's where it's spectacular. All of this information that we're delivered upon is driven to us in a way that allows us to experience cultures of change. Now, why is that important? Well, there's 8 billion people on planet Earth. 50% of them have never known life without the internet, which makes it an intriguing time to understand if we spend all our time like this, what are we doing about that? So when the blockchain conference said to me, I'd love you to do something a little bit different, I said, well, why don't we talk about pitching? Why? Because I'm pitched all the time. And there are certain things that can be taught to make people better presenters, better storytellers, ultimately better drivers of emotion. Why is that important? Look, I grew up in a world where sight, sound, and motion equals emotion. Why is that important? 75% of purchase decisions today are made emotionally. We sell to the heart, we justify to the head. In the world of this, most of it kind of feels a bit like what? It feels a bit like it's here first, then to there. And I want to pivot on that. But why would I want to talk about that? Well, frankly, an audience is young and hungry for change. I'm speaking to these young adults today that are leaving their 9-to-5 jobs. 9-to-5 jobs, of which they've treated 9-to-5 in the last couple of years, to spend 24/7 working around the clock to understand what Web3 in the metaverse is going to afford them in their career moving forward. I see that as an incredible opportunity to help them come along with a certain capability that I've been taught, which I think I can pass a few people on to as well. Firstly, let me talk about how to capture ideas. Every young adult I speak to today is a polymath. What is a polymath? It's a person who has these multiple dimensions of thought and ideas and creativity, and ultimately they want to make it lucrative and have a livelihood out of it. Awesome. But how do you capture ideas? Well, I started out in the early 20s understanding that fundamentally the way that we learn ideas today is broken. We are taught naturally to do what's called the basic ordering of ideas. What's that? That's top, bottom, left, right. That's not how the nature of humans work. We work inside out. Nature works. Trees are grown up, top and bottom. We're rooted. We go this way. It's not linear. It's not top, bottom, you know. It doesn't work that way. I speak to these young creatives that go through design school and art school and whatever, and they come out and they decide they're going to be in the world of digital, and what do? They sit in front of Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint all day. That's not what we're really designed for. However, it's a lot of what we do. So what's this radiant thinking that I'm talking about? It's called mind mapping, or radiant thinking. I learned it in my early 20s. It's a very simple principle. You draw a circle in the center of a page and you write the topic of which you're going to want to express. Off that, you draw branches of each one of the topics that you care about, primary branches. And then you take each one of those and you create another branch, and you keep writing the topics till you extrapolate all the ideas you have on one big piece of paper. In fact, I'm known to go to meetings today with these big pads and squeaky markers like a kid would have, and I take notes on one page. Remember when we went through school and you studied and you would make copious notes? Do you guys remember that? Copious notes. Wow, this lecturer is speaking really fast. I need to take all these notes. It's incredible wisdom. Then what do? You go home, close the book, never open those notes again. Why? Because it's the opposite of how you work. And the truth is, the way we work is this radial thinking. Keyword-driven world. That's what we are. I don't come here and go, Abu Dhabi, great restaurants in the area that I'm in. I write restaurants. We're key-driven. We're keyword-driven. And we seem to be wanting to do more of that. So, radiant thinking and mind mapping is a great way to extrapolate ideas. The other way that it allows you to do, also, the other good thing it allows you to do, is not just capture those ideas, but keep you on track. So oftentimes, certainly when I was growing up through media, I'd go into these leadership meetings when, I see people with copious notes get lost very quickly because the leader of the business typically wants to go somewhere else other than this linear note-taking that they've taken themselves upon. So if you scrub that and you have this one piece of paper that has all of the things that you want to talk about, you can say this is the central theme that I was interested in, but you could jump to the thing that you care about most, which might be in the top left-hand corner of a notepad. And that becomes a central idea, and then you can have all these interesting notes around that. It's just this spidery, creepy kind of vibe of all this idea that you have. But it's great for you personally, to capture ideas and to put them in a place that helps you document your thoughts. Do it for work, you can do it for home, you can do it for play, all sorts of planning, mind mapping. Give it a go. It's a lot like yoga though. You have to do it 2 or 3 times to make it feel like it might be for you. The first time's incredibly uncomfortable, the second time seems incredibly awkward, and the third time it may just click and suddenly you're a lifer. And that's me, mind mapping. Now why is that important? Because in anything that you do when it comes to storytelling, you need to understand where you're going. That's why the most important piece of stories start with what? Once upon a time. Once upon a time. And that is where the captivation begins. So what is it that you want to actually talk about? What's the thread? Here's the secret sauce to every single thing that I do when it comes to presenting. It's very, very simple. I start with the conclusion. I start with what it is that I'm going to finish with. What is my end goal with all of what I'm putting together? And by the way, not all presentations are the same. And I hope you know that. So if you're actually in a position of saying, I'm trying to inspire people, there's a particular type of story to do that. If you're in a position where you want to educate people and conclude them in a different way, there's a type of story for that. If you're actually trying to do a long-form story that is trying to tell somebody an articulation of something that's longer than education, there's also a type of presentation for that. And that should never, ever be the sort of thing that you would present to people. That's probably documented, it's probably written, and it's probably bound, and it's more importantly called a book. So let's start with that and leave that for another time. But the most important one for me is the story to move people, either to action or to inspiration or to an order. But if you start with the conclusion and you work back, you have the ability to understand where you're headed. Now, when I start thinking about mind mapping ideas and express those ideas, I end up with too much for a presentation. But once you've got these ideas expressed, what can happen is you break out all of the salient pieces that you like and you turn it into what? A linear thread. Why? Because at some point in time, you're going to have to present it. And to present that way, again, you start with conclusion and move all the way back to the beginning. The once upon a time. And I started by saying that people have asked me, is presenting a natural gift or is it something that can be taught? It sure isn't natural to me. It was the most uncomfortable thing for me to do. I'm a creative. I'm a designer. I'm one of the last designers of old school design. If you guys ever want to corner me and talk about what it's like to draw Bembo, or what's Baskerville, what does Garamond look like, or why does Futura look different to Helvetica, let's go there. You want to talk about kerning? You want to talk about fontography? I'm an old fontographer. I self-taught myself computers. I'm of that school. But I decided that at some point in time when there's a design culture, that instead of being somebody who just loved design, I was also going to be a generalist. So I understood that it's not just design I needed to study in the depth of things like photography, fontography, kerning, line spacing, and all those articulations of things that people don't care about today. I also needed to understand what was design. And design manifests itself in this thinking. So I stopped studying design and I started to be curious around things like architecture, urban planning, food, things that are actually well designed. And that had made me a better designer. But that's just the start of it. And my career is a bit different. So I started out as a designer in my early 20s. Pretty basic as a print designer. Then along came this thing called multimedia. Before the internet, we used to send these things out called CD-ROMs. I'm of that generation when things had to be sent out to people. Awesome. Which is ironic because I ultimately ended up at AOL for a while. But what's really interesting about that, and you guys can Google that sometime and find out what I'm talking about. But what I think is really interesting from that basic background is that by the time the internet came around, there were technologies that could be invented that would allow things to happen, not just in automation, but in terms of time saving. So I went from somebody who was a designer to somebody who was a technologist, because I'm very curious about that, to somebody who ended up helping to run media for AOL in Europe. I looked after 13 countries for them for a while, running their media and marketing. And my part-time job was sitting on panels at very large conferences and talking about how media and people engage. And then somebody offered me the opportunity to present. Now, I'd been presenting the whole time, my media strategies for touching people and moving them with these incredible web experiences. But I'd never presented to a large audience on stage before. So there are certain rules that you can adopt, and I break all of them. So don't follow my rules, or don't do as I do, do as I say. I don't know if that's a term, I don't know if it's a phrase, whatever, dude, I'm making it up, it's mine. But what I mean by that is there are certain principles you should adopt. And it's all about connecting, period, full stop. And I told you there are types of presentations that have come along the way, but the truth is, to get there, we need to understand how to actually present. So the first presentation I ever did was really terrible. Didn't know what I was doing, did a terrible presentation. It really wasn't what I would say is my most sterling moment, but from that I learnt some of these techniques in which I want to tell you about. And why is pitching important? Because your job, period, full stop, is to move somebody. As I said, either you're educating them, you're either inspiring them, you're asking them for an order, you're asking them for a job, you're asking for something. And that's why you have the opportunity to do it. If you're somebody who wants to present to an audience, and maybe it's an agency pitch, or maybe it's a keynote, or maybe it's a TED Talk, all of the principles are very similar. But there is one thing that's interesting. If you have an opportunity to present a business idea to a group of individuals, I would recommend you do not do that Monday or Tuesday. I do not recommend you do that Thursday or Friday. I do recommend you do it around Wednesday. And the reason for that is attention. So Monday or Tuesday, I fundamentally believe people are still trying to get over their weekend. And although they'll give you your attention, they may not hold what your principles of what you're talking about in the architecture of their mind. And by the time we get to Thursdays and Fridays, and out here in the Middle East, it's probably a bit different. Maybe I should time shift that and bring it back a day or so, because your weekend shifts are different to mine. But you get the principle, which is you kind of want to be in the middle. The reason you want to be in the middle is that that's the grind that you're in the middle of, and you're not thinking about you planning your weekend, and you're not just coming off your weekend. And that's, I find, the best time to hold somebody's attention. Particularly if you know you're not the only person presenting. So if there are other people presenting, and there are slots that you could choose to present in, pick the middle. Don't go first, don't go last, but go in the middle. It's where you hold people's attention. Now let's talk about holding people's attention. There are some things that naturally you know people do. And particularly when we've been in the middle of a pandemic, there are certain traits that people have adopted. By the way, every single moment of actually communicating with other people is a presenting or a presenting opportunity. And what do I mean by that? Zoom calls, absolutely they are. Phone calls, absolutely they are. Presenting in front of audiences, absolutely they are. And there are some traits I'd like to teach you right now. And let's talk about that in the word of language. The first thing is this. There are certain gestures that you can do when you get an opportunity to present, and we all do them. And that first gesture that you don't ever want to do, and I did it today, is this. So I break my own rule. It's to turn your back on an audience. There is nothing worse from a body language than having your back turned, obviously. But not that obvious, because when you're in a place that you can't control, like a boardroom, and you don't know your lines, you have a tendency to do this. And that's not good for human connection. It's like turning your back on somebody. Same psychology. That's the first one. The second one is gesture. Now, culturally, I don't know whether this matches, but I'm going to say it does. So where I'm from, gestures mean the same thing. Now, let me tell you what they are now. I notice that when everybody presents, we all use gestures. Here's the first one. Palm up. What do you think palm up means? Openness. You're willing. You're here to receive. Palm down. Authority. Pointing. Also authority. Incredible. So those things, when you're thinking about presenting and everything else is ad lib, fine. But there are certain gestures you can use, and now I see that they could be pronounced, but they're there to actually connect. The other thing is a thing called verbal defluency. I've had the very good opportunity to speak to a voice coach, of which I've never learned anything from because apparently I'm unteachable. But let me impart his wisdom to you. I'm just kidding. There is one thing that I notice when I hear people present, whether they're on the phone or on a video, and what do you think that would be? Shingy, I've got a great idea that I think is going to be an amazing idea for you to consider investing in this idea that I'm building this incredible mega brand that feels a bit like, are you joking? I have no idea what those people say when they stick their ums and their ahs in the middle of a presentation. You know what I'm talking about? Verbal defluency. It's a horrendous thing to experience. And worse when you're on the phone. Oftentimes I'll sit with a pen and a pad and I will scribe how many times I hear somebody's and ah, and I've completely forgotten what that person is trying to tell me. So please stop ums and ahs. But before you stop them, you have to be aware of it. So why do you think people have ums and ahs? We don't like gaps. We don't like silence. Particularly in a presentation with a large audience, parents have thought you should stop and pause and go, ah. It's probably a bit long, isn't it? But silence can actually be quite powerful, particularly when you're trying to connect. But you don't have to play catch-up to your brain by inserting an and an ah, because an and an ah is actually just bad at communicating the idea. So I want you to watch those ums and ahs when you're presenting. The other thing I would like you to consider when you're doing ums and ahs and all that is also when you're presenting, it's always great to obviously look at somebody. And a lot of people are like, hey man, you look like an extrovert, you're very comfortable in front of audiences. That is absolutely not true. I'm an introvert. And I don't even know if that's a real word, but I'm somebody who doesn't, I like my solitude, I like to be alone, I'm actually quite awkward. But I learned this thing years ago when I was a kid, that if you can't look somebody in the eye, it's very hard to communicate and lock into them. So when you're presenting, if you can't look at somebody in the eye, look over their eye. I'm going to have the fortune of looking at this camera right now, and if I don't want to look down the barrel of the lens, which is incredibly hard to do and stay concentrated, I'll look at the Canon logo instead. And it kind of makes me look like I'm looking at them, but I'm not really, because I'm not looking down the barrel of the lens. When you're presenting to an audience, and I don't care whether it's 3 people or 1,000, look at somebody, because it makes them feel connected. And it makes you feel like you're connecting with them, even if you're looking above them or over them. Cool? Awesome. Let's get back to design for a second. Anybody here a doodler? Does doodling make sense when I say that? Brother, you put your hand up so fast. Can you explain to 50 of your closest friends just now what a doodle is? A drawing, yeah. Of what? Yeah, do you still do it? Did you do it as a kid? Did you get in trouble at school when you were doodling? Anyone else get in trouble for doodling at school? Shame on those teachers, they did not know. Here's the thing about doodling, sister with the mask and mustard top on. Hey, when you were doodling, what do you think you were doing? Why do you think you were doing it? Or yeah, kind of, almost. I'll come back to you in a second. Brother on the edge, was that you that put your hand up? You a doodler? Did you get in trouble at school? You doodle now? Why do you doodle? No, but okay, but why do you do it? You do it on calls? You do it on Zoom calls and all that rubbish?
Zoom calls, because it keeps me occupied.
Yeah, now we're getting there. All right. Okay. Doodling, for those who don't know what doodling is, it's scribbling on a page. It happens in conference calls, it happens in business meetings, and you feel like a bit of a dope doing it, and you look around and you're like, oh my God, look what I've done. I made these patterns. You know what that does? That sends a signal to your vaga, your cortex of your brain, that says to you, your visual cortex comes in, it registers that you're doing something, it does this on a page, and you're more likely to remember that doodle than any notes you take in that meeting. And when I talked about mind mapping, starting with a circle, branching out with these topics, ending up with a big scribbly on a pad, the power of that is to articulate those ideas. If you're doodling helps you concentrate. It's awesome. So we should all do it. We should keep doing it. Because if you're not doing that, you might be doing something else, which I find incredibly bad habits in offices. The old shaky leg. That person who's just like, oh, dude, are you for real? Is there a sound in your head that you have to be jiggling like that? So it's really good to take these concentration behaviors and channel them to somewhere else. And it's just like the ums and ahs. Because I'm stopped with this cameraing thing now, because I'd rather talk to you guys for a few minutes. Who does ums and ahs in meetings? And do you guys do it here? Is that culturally a thing? Yeah. Now that I've told you that, it's going to haunt you. It's going to haunt you, and you're going to be much better at lack of verbal defluency. Here's what will make you an incredible presenter of anything, is to learn your lines. So I'm of the world of media and advertising. We have less than 5 seconds to hold somebody's attention like a billboard. If somebody can tell me what neocom is it neocom or something? I'm seeing billboards for a city of the future or something. They held my attention for about 3 of what I could have given them 5 seconds. So communication should be very assertive, should be very to the point. It shouldn't be all fact-driven, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I want you to think about learning your lines. I want you to think about understanding you have seconds to hold somebody's attention. You could hold a whole presentation on one slide, but you're holding their attention like a billboard. So that's an opportunity to think about. And here's what's interesting about that. When we're thinking about presenting, to learn your lines also means how do you know what's coming next? So here's the thing about story. If you start with a conclusion, you work back to whatever your once upon a time is. In the middle is going to be ebb and flow. Now, most people, when they present, are given somewhere between an hour and 45 minutes and an hour-ish, typically. True? That's a long time to hold somebody's attention. Here's what happens in that time. You will go through peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. You're experiencing it now. Where you're like, yeah, that was kind of interesting, now I'm drifting. Oh, that's interesting, now I'm drifting. Here's what happens in presentations or pitches when you have to experience peaks and valleys. 2 things. Know that they're going to happen, so be aware of it. The second thing is, it's not you. It's us as humans and our lack of concentration. But here's what I want you to think about. Don't ever lose somebody on the inspiration, the peak. If you're going to lose somebody, lose them on the valley. the fact. The truth is, we all start to wonder when people throw too many facts at us. So go the other way and just make sure your peaks and hollows are going to happen. And understand that if you're going to lose somebody, lose them on a fact, because you can always follow up with the facts. It's very hard to follow up with inspiration. Does that make sense? Awesome. When you are thinking about presenting, make sure you don't have a slide that is blah, 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 blah. That is not a presentation. That is a written document. There's nothing worse than going to a presentation or a pitch and all you see is their entire business plan laid out in bullet point form on a bloody slide that you could have read. So you want to be able to strip that back, just like you do a billboard, and say, this is how I'm going to hold somebody's attention. And it could just be a single image, or it could be some interesting facts on a page, or some interesting commentary on the page, of which you add your color. And because you've learnt your lines, you're able to thread that entire sequence together in a way that makes sense. Cool? Here's the other thing. Death by PowerPoint. This morning, when I presented, I did a very short introduction of 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, I presented 20 slides. Typically, I'm told the best presentations are around 12 slides. 12 slides. Awesome. God bless. Get on with it. But for me, I cannot communicate like that. It's not how my brain works. My brain works in rapid fire, and I need them to keep up with me. And that helps my train of thought. But every time I present, I'm thinking about the next slide in sequence. So whatever's on the slide is not necessarily what I'm talking about or what I'm thinking about. I'm talking about it, but I'm thinking about the next sequence. Why? Because I know where I want my story to go. And I may miss my marks. But we want to look for markers along the way because it's going to help you articulate your story. And the number one piece of advice and secret I can tell you about any presentation on planet Earth that will be successful is simply this. Make it personal. What do you mean? I've already told you it's once upon a time. I've already looked at my peaks and valleys and when I'm going to lose somebody. I'm happy to lose them on a fact. I've already added space to my presentation. I've already pointed. I've already gestured. I've already done my ups and downs. I'm no longer and ahhing. But why is it still not connecting in a way that could really connect? It's because if it's not personal, it's not personal. And it should be. There's a reason you've chosen the career that you've taken. There's a reason you're standing in front of an audience presenting what you believe in. There's a reason you're passionate. And ultimately, it's why you've made it personal that allow us to connect more than anything before. If anybody saw me present earlier, I introduced my family in my slides. And the reason for that is to give context really to the messy muddle of what I grew up with and how freedom and independence and self-expression was very different for me as a kid and how it's very different for kids today. And then I start to bridge into the things I want to talk about. So it's about helping people understand your context to helping them understand their context. And then you want some of this. Quite often when I present, people give me a lot of this. That's just me. But that's kind of how we want to connect. We want to thread it all together in a way that brings it home. For me, what that also is, a reflection and view, is design. And the underline for design is this. Very basic rules when it comes to presenting, according to Shingy. And that's this. I love uppercase compressed fonts. It's just my bag. If you like wide fonts with lots of line spacing, you don't want it to be uppercase and it's lowercase, great. That's all design aesthetic. But I can tell you that what you should not use is italics. Pixels aren't really designed for italics. Most projectors don't really work with italics that well. I tend to stay away from them. I certainly don't like bold italics. Sometimes people say, why everything you do is uppercase, it looks like you're screaming at me. It's 9 times out of 10, I'm screaming at people. So it's okay, it fits my vibe. But the flip side of that is, Italics? Nuh-uh. Underline? Why don't we like underlines? They're hyperlinks in the web world. Italic underline? No, that just seems psychotic. Bold italic underline? That just seems lazy. So all of those elements to me means that if it's not aesthetic to you, it's not going to be aesthetic to somebody else. And it should be a reflection of where you are, is good design. And design is taste. And design-a-log, creating a dialogue through design, is another way of connecting your own values. Now, why is that important? Because today, design matters. What do I mean by that? If all of this noise is happening, if we're hit with 1,500 media messages per day, if you've just said, hey, I've got 45 minutes to pitch a billion-dollar business idea, and you turn up with something that is incredibly badly designed and has lots of design mistakes in it, how can they believe in what you're speaking of has all the detail and the care of what your plan is? So it's very important that the reflection of what you are is a reflection of the design of which you're presenting. And I see so many bad designs because a lot of people are designing presentations for the wrong type of presentation audience. Meaning, if you really have exhaustive information in presentation, please just hand it out or send it as a PDF or bind it up as a book or do something completely different for an audience of which you stand in front of. You can always follow up with facts later, but the inspiration you can't. The idea of simplifying design and personalizing it can also mean you could put your own images in it. They don't all have to be happy hands animated GIFs. They could be your images. They could be inexpensive licensed images, but they give you a visual representation of what you're trying to articulate in the story of which you're trying to tell. And that's incredibly important because, again, the business here is to connect with people. Period, full stop. One other thing I want to tell you, and I'm going to leave you with this, and it's simply this. Actually, I have two things I want to tell you about. Let me start with the first one. Who in here drinks caffeine? Coffee. Ripper. Okay, please do this. Next time you go and do a presentation, women drink caffeine. You're awesome because you metabolize caffeine differently than dudes. Men, lay off it. It turns us into jittery idiots. So go get a green juice or something. That's one thing. Here's another question for you. Who here gets nervous when you present? Show of hands. Yes, most of us. If you didn't put your hand up, bullshit. Okay, so here's what happens. Nervousness. What happens when you're nervous? You drink all your water. You sweat. You feel like, oh, I'm so dry-mouthed. Like, how do I shake? How do I calm down? If you're already nervous, don't add fuel to that fire, and caffeine is not the fuel you want to add to that fire. I'm underscoring that, please. However, the natural tendency when you're dry mouth and nervous and sweating is to pound water. Let me give you a professional tip. About to go on stage, super nervous, don't know the audience very well, super dry mouth, I pounded water. Guess what happens? Got to go pee. Can't concentrate. Got no time. I'm getting called on stage. What a mistake, you idiot. So be careful. But here's what you want to do. You want to send a signal to your brain that you are not dehydrated. And how do you do that? You simply take a sip of water and you hold it in your mouth. And your lips and all the goodness inside your mouth will tell your brain that you are satiated and hydrated. And you'll be able to have these little sips of water without having a big old bladder that's about to burst. Because I have been there, and it is not a good scene. The other thing is, please, if an audience is gracing you with their presence, do not allow your first words that you utter to that audience be the first words that you've uttered in that day. How horrendous would that be if you have not warmed up and you go and speak to somebody? It just doesn't work like that. And let me give you a real quick cheat to do that. So here's what you do. If you want to warm up your lips real quick, it's very simple. You pout your lips like this. This feels a bit funny for me to do this in front of you, but whatever, dude. I'm going to do it anyway. You pout your lips like this, and you do this. And all the spitty bits and blah, 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 those little mumbly things that I just did right then, it tingles your lips and makes you feel lovely and warm. And then you can present with confidence. So let's recap. Pitching isn't about putting your entire presentation on paper and just trying to sort of articulate a story that has no conclusion and hope to God you can thread the whole thing together in front of an audience. It's not about that. It's about practice. It's about understanding what the story is. It's starting with the conclusion and work backwards. Start with your version of Once Upon a Time. The other thing is presenting with others. Put your hand up in here if you've presented with others before. All of us. Here's what happens when that happens, right? Hey, man, you do your pitch. It's awesome. Now I'm going to hand it over to Larry. He's like, oh, great. This is me. I'm going to talk about, I'm the data dude. This is what that does. That's awesome. Oh, and here's our implementation person. They're going to do that. You know what that does to an audience? It makes you feel schizophrenic. And why do we do it as a company? We do it because we have to feel like everybody's a contributor. Stop it. I would much rather one MC to go from beginning to end than have these 5 different voices, 5 different conclusions with 5 different styles. And by the way, you probably haven't rehearsed it. You're doing it live in front of the client, in front of the audience, in front of the group of people of which have given you time. Please stop it. Unless you can run a race and hand that thing off just like a relay does, just don't do it. It's not worth it. It doesn't matter if he doesn't get to speak. Let him write the email to say thanks for having us in the room and all I did was sit in the back there and ate the cookies. Bless. I told you that was going to be the last piece of advice, but it's not. I have one other thing. When somebody gives you 45 minutes, give them back 20. It's not going to be worked like that, does it? You can't give them back that much time, but please give them back 5. Leave yourself some time for maybe questions. That'd be nice. As opposed to just turning up, verbally vomiting on them with something that looks like the worst design on planet Earth for a pitch idea for the next big thing. Really? And I see it all the time. So I want to take you out of the awkwardness and just articulate some of these obvious ideas that I hope are obvious to you, which will help you sharpen your tools so you can become the best presenters out there. Because what I want people to remember was that was a story well told in a way that I could understand it. It concluded with something that gives me an action and ultimately made me make a decision on what I felt about that. And that's the job today, in my opinion. And if you can't design, get somebody to help you. If you can design, add some personality to it. When you are designing the script, make sure you make it personal and ultimately think about what that person is going to feel like in the conclusion. This has nothing to do with Bitcoin or the blockchain or crypto or NFTs. This part for me, for you this afternoon, is about connecting with other humans. So let's get on with it. Thanks very much indeed, guys. Cheers.